It's time for a reality check.
We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill, and we are continuing with the lab series. And today we want to talk about inflammation, detox, weight loss resistance, and what inflammation actually means. It's so interesting to see on social media the buzzwords that evolve in the ether, and inflammation is definitely one of them right now. And I think it is a very misunderstood concept of what inflammation actually is. And then in the context of weight loss, how inflammation plays a role in that. And then how we view as professionals inflammation and how we approach that with clients. And then really like what you're looking for within the body ultimately. So inflammation, again, I think is one of those words that a lot of people use to describe their symptoms that they're having. And it could be a wide array of them. So just general like puffiness, bloating, water retention around your cycle, joint aches, or just feeling swollen even. But I think also people confuse inflammation as like body fat, or like I said, as like bloating is not inflammation. There's likely inflammation present within the body, but bloating in and of itself is not inflammation.
Water acute inflammation versus like chronic inflammation are two different things, right? Like if you have a couple alcoholic beverages, you may have some acute inflammation because you just put a toxic thing in your system. That doesn't mean you need to do some major protocol because you feel a little bit fluffy the next morning, right?
Right. And inflammation is an immune response actually in the body. It's the body's way of responding to something it perceives as a threat or an injury or an infection or a toxin like alcohol, like Jess said. So it involves these immune cells and chemical messengers and changes at the tissue level. And to Jess's point, there's acute inflammation and there's chronic inflammation. So acute inflammation, the body sends immune activity to that specific area, right? So if you fall down, kid falls off their bike, scrapes their knee, right? The immune system is sending something to that specific spot to repair the damage and of course fight any infection. People are pretty familiar with like signs of acute inflammation in that context where there's like redness and heat. There's a little bit of like throbbing, right? Swelling, pain, whatever. That's, I think, the general like thought process around acute inflammation. But inflammation can be internal and systemic, which is what a lot of people are referring to present day with this word floating around on the internet. And inflammation that way can show up as a lot of different things. It can show up as fatigue, brain fog, puffiness, joint aches, fluid retention, digestion changes, skin issues, headaches, PMS, poor sleep, blood sugar instability, insulin resistance, all of those things. And of course, weight loss feeling more difficult, which we'll talk about. So we have to understand that inflammation is a response in the body. So many people are like, what do I take for inflammation? Well, what's driving the inflammation is what we actually have to ask and answer, right? So that's what we have to figure out. And again, acute inflammation is one thing. That's that short-term repair and response from the body. But chronic inflammation is when the body's kind of doubling down because it keeps getting a signal that something is wrong. And when chronic inflammation is present, the immune system is producing this inflammatory signaling that's happening, right? And those signals can influence how your cells communicate, how effective insulin is, how fluid is retained and moved through the body, your tissues and their recovery, and your brain's perception of energy, how hormones are metabolized and those chemical messengers involved. And most importantly, how the liver prioritizes its workload and doing what it does, because there's only so much capacity on the body before things start to break down. And inflammation certainly has a big impact on the effectiveness of the functions and the systems in the body when it's present. But again, we have to figure out why. Now, we'll dig into this, and we kind of shared like what inflammation chronically can look like. But in the context of weight loss specifically, and I think we need to dig into this nuance a little bit throughout the episode, is that obesity in and of itself, if somebody is obese, there's likely systemic inflammation underlying to some degree. There's just going to be.
And that's not driving your obesity.
Right.
Having this body composition where you have excess body fat and you're under muscled, either of those situations can cause systemic inflammation. I actually saw, funny timing, 4 weeks to the beach, our friend over there posted about this on his Instagram this morning, saying he's had so many women come to him saying, I'm not eating gluten and I'm not doing this because it's going to reduce my inflammation. And he's like, hello, you are obese and we're drinking wine a couple nights a week. We're doing these other things. We're missing the forest for the trees, or, stepping over dollars to pick up pennies, right? We're doing these things to try to reduce inflammation when the biggest thing you can do is build some muscle, put some muscle on your body frame so that you can improve that ratio of muscle mass to body fat. Go into a caloric deficit for a solid few months and reduce the body fat. Start to move more, do all the basics first, and then let's see what happens, because naturally that's going to improve some of your inflammation, some of your blood markers. So again, when we're talking about doing more targeted protocols, it's when we have already done all these basics first, and then there's still inflammation present and symptoms present.
Well, and to that point too, gluten is a common inflammatory thing that you can consume, right? There are several of those that are typical triggers, but generally gluten is not the root of your problems. Gluten can certainly contribute to additional inflammation if you're already in an inflamed state, but removing gluten is like very small piece of the puzzle, and again, not the biggest rock to move if you're inflamed. It goes back to that same question of what supplements do I take, and it's like we're not understanding what inflammation is if you're saying what supplement will reduce my inflammation, because I would imagine when somebody's asking that question, it's I feel puffy, I feel bloated, I'm retaining water, I'm weight loss resistant, and you're asking a very, very broad question, and it's just not one that's possible to answer.
And also in order of importance, right? First and foremost, are you hitting your protein targets daily? Are you adding whole foods and fruits and vegetables daily? Are we having some omega-3s in our food intake, right? Or are we just eating processed stuff? If we start with those basics, naturally you're going to get better results than if you just skip to cutting gluten. And a lot of times I see people cutting gluten in a way that it's like, okay, I'm going to go buy gluten-free foods that are marketed to us that have all these other additives, right? We're still missing the basics of adding nutrients first. So we're looking at whole context in any of these things that we're going to suggest here. We're looking at the full context of the person, and putting puzzle pieces together. But we're never skipping over that piece.
Yep, for sure. And then when it comes to inflammation and fat loss and metabolism specifically, certainly chronic inflammation can make the body less metabolically responsive because it's changing that internal environment. So remember, in any context, when we're talking about gut dysbiosis, inflammation, hormone imbalances, whatever, so many people think this hormone is off, so I can't lose weight. It's not this brick wall that is built up in the fat loss department inside your body. It is absolutely going to downregulate metabolic function, making the act of creating and executing a caloric deficit for an extended period of time consistently much more difficult for you, right? The body is going to be less responsive. So it's important to understand that if let's say you are super down-regulated metabolically, you have inflammation, you have Hashimoto's, whatever, it might be that you have to be at 900 calories to lose weight, which is not recommended, not realistic, and not sustainable for anybody long-term, and it's going to create more health problems. So you can see why it's so important to do that work up front first to get healthy and be more metabolically healthy, because then we're removing all of those additional barriers that are making it so much more difficult, and obviously getting you healthier first, which is the most important thing,
versus just removing the symptoms. Like I talked to Jill about this example, but like my dad has Lyme disease, the aches and pains and inflammation comes and goes in his joints. His solution is always, okay, I'm just going to fast, because when I don't eat, my inflammation goes down. And it's like, okay, that's good until it's not anymore, because that absolutely will help with short-term inflammation. But long-term, we're creating a stressor on your system if you're chronically just not eating, right? We're undernourishing. We're going to have other trickle-down effects. So we're wanting to look at how can we reduce the symptoms to help somebody be physically comfortable, obviously, if there's something severe like that, like physical pain. But then also, okay, now how do I get the system to adapt the way that I want it to adapt? Because that's reducing the symptom and creating an adaptation that is actually not favorable for long-term outcomes.
I think also too, Jess and I were just talking about this before we kicked off this episode of, I talk a lot about my hormonal journey back in 2021 when I was, for the first time in my life, experiencing true weight loss resistance, where I was like, holy cow, like this feels really, really hard after somebody who competed in bodybuilding and lost 60 pounds twice, right? So I was like, what the heck is wrong? Like, why does this feel really, really hard? Now, I had to get very honest with myself through that time that I was really high stress from work. I was a lot more sedentary than I had been historically because I was glued to my desk. And I just didn't have very healthy habits. I was prioritizing work over everything, right? So long stretches without eating. So I was unintentionally fasting, whatever. All of these things compounded. So my habits and my decisions and the way that I was living my life led me to adrenal dysfunction, a lot of stress in my body, a downregulated thyroid, severe gut dysbiosis, which created a very inflamed environment internally. So I did feel,
like the puffiness.
I felt puffy, and I was like, my cheeks were huge, right? You see a lot of like moon face about cortisol. I was also 30 pounds heavier. So like there's inflammation, but there was also additional body fat I needed to lose, right? So going through that process, I talk about how I lost 12 pounds of inflammation in 4 weeks. I mean, literally my jewelry was like flying off my fingers and hands, and clothes fit totally differently. Like it was astounding. And it was very clear that it was inflammation, right? Like my pictures looked crazy through that 4 weeks. But it's important to know a couple of things. One, you are not me. You don't have the same, you're not presenting ever. No two people are ever going to present exactly the same labs, diet history, medical history, all of those things. Not to mention, I gained weight before I lost that 12 pounds, semi-intentionally, not all of it, but some of it, through trying to rebuild my metabolism leading up to that. And then I crashed and burned and made bad decisions. So obviously that 0 out of 10 don't recommend. But I gained weight and then lost the weight later because I was like, sometimes you do have to add a little bit of body fat. Sometimes you do have to gain a little bit of weight in the healing process.
But also you had this inflammatory weight to lose. And I want to differentiate this because I've had clients, how do I know that you have inflammatory weight to lose versus, okay, you're just in a deficit? Well, we're tracking our clients' calories. Like we're seeing everything that they put in their body. So like I have this one woman, she lost like 14 or 15 pounds the first week of a protocol that we did. But her calories were controlled because I've been working with her for 2 years and we did not change her calorie intake.
I ate 2,200 calories minimum through that process.
Right. So I say that to say, okay, that's true inflammatory loss because you in this situation and this client I'm referring to had that extra inflammation to lose. Weight loss is not the goal of any of these protocols. Healing is the goal. That may be a side effect if you're already inflamed to begin with. So again, I say that to say my gut dysbiosis is pretty jacked up right now. I think we're going to do an episode about my whole GI map at some point. But I don't have this extra. I'm not holding on to extra water weight. I don't expect that when I start a protocol, I'm going to see weight loss. I say this to say I have a lot of clients who are like, well, time out. If somebody else lost weight, I should lose weight during this. And it's like, no, that's not the goal. The goal is to heal your system. And to reduce inflammation, to reduce stress overload. But that may happen to some people who are already inflamed. Second, the differentiator between, you know what your calories are because you were tracking. My client I'm talking about, we knew what her calories were because I'm looking at it every day. A lot of times what happens is women do these whole food protocols and they say, oh my gosh, I lost so much inflammatory weight. Meanwhile, I'm like, no, you did. You're just in a deficit on accident because you're full and you're eating healthy foods and you weren't doing that before. When you have more fiber and more protein, you're accidentally in a deficit because you feel like more satiated.
You also lose water weight when you are in a calorie deficit.
If you're in a calorie deficit too. True. But I've had people who are like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is inflammatory weight. And I'm like, no. You're just truly in a deficit right now. And you haven't been in the last 2 years. And now you're seeing the outcomes of what that looks like. So when we're talking about inflammation, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about this, oh, I'm in a deficit because I'm accident, right? So I just wanted to clarify that. And then you touched on this. This is something I wanted to add to our notes today. In that time in 2021, you were in a super stressed out life season, like coming out of a messy relationship and starting a new life. And it was like finally the place in your life where you could breathe and feel safe and in this healthy marriage. And like, it's almost like it caught up to your body, but years and years of chronic stress on the system can cause inflammation. So, again, when people are looking for the quick fix and they're looking for the vitamin, when they're looking for, well, I'll just take a ginger supplement and that'll help. It's like, well, time out. What got us here? That's important. When we're looking at stress, I always talk about this scale. There's these buckets on either side of the scale when it comes to stress and recovery inputs, right? So we can reduce our stressors to an extent. There's some stressors we can reduce pretty easily, like maybe not running 6 days a week, right? If in a healthy, recovered, adaptive body, we should be able to recover to that. It's fine. But in a stressed out body, it's a stressor we can remove. We can remove some inflammatory food items because that's an easy thing we can control. However, we can also add to our recovery bucket. You've done so much work over the last 4 or 5 years that we've worked together of EMDR therapy and physical and mental healing. Sauna time where you're just doing breath work. You're not go all the time. Not having your computer up late at night. Like, you've done all these things that add to that recovery bucket to heal that systemic stressor over time. And I just want to point that out. Again, this is not, oh, it's a physiological thing. Let's add a protocol. It's like these behavioral changes also make a giant impact along with it.
Yeah. And I think too, knowing that there's never really one thing. There's not one root cause of like, oh, we got to fill this gap in the wall and everything will be fine. There was, when people talk about fight or flight, same thing. I think it's a slightly overused concept. I went through such a stressful period of life that fight or flight was my body suppressing a lot of this dysfunction when I was literally, truly trying to make it to the next day, wake up and go to bed so I could get through that day. When I got into this, I removed myself from all this toxicity and did find myself in a nice, healthy, peaceful place. Guess what? That was when my body said, phew, we're not just trying to survive and get to the next day. I got some shit for you to take care of, right?
And this happens a lot with women who are, oh, I'm 45 now. My metabolism sucks. I don't know why. It's like, are you kidding me? For years and years, you've been chronically dieting. And now you think, oh, it's just my hormone change because I'm older now. And it's like, no, you've been conditioning your body to be in this place now. So as soon as you're not running 6 days a week, as soon as you slow down, your metabolism is firing back. It's mad at you, right? Like, for lack of a better term.
Everyone's body threshold is different. So you know what? Your coworker, Susie, who's been on GLP for 2 years and runs 6 days a week and eats McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You might be like, why do I feel like shit? And why am I inflamed? And why do I have to now go through healing before I can lose weight? And she can do that. Who fucking cares? You're not Susie, right? Susie's going to crash and burn. Better believe it. That we have to get out of that lane too, and understanding that your body is your body. It is completely unique to you, and no one else's result and timeline is relevant. So I think all of those caveats are very important to understand when we're talking about inflammation, because the last thing we want you to do from this episode or any episode is identify with something and then let it be your crutch. Let it be the thing that holds you back. Get that validation, have awareness around your habits and maybe what exactly is going on in your labs. And then you have to do something about it. You have to take ownership of like, okay, I got myself here. Now it's going to take some time to get back out of it. So, okay, in the context of inflammation when it comes to fat loss, now that we've given you all of our caveats, I feel like we can dive into this a little bit. Yes, fat loss is an energy balance at the end of the day, calories in, calories out, right? But we've shared how that equation can be impacted. How the body can, the body's ability to respond to the deficit and the weight loss intention is absolutely influenced by, like I said, the physiological environment, right? So, if we have these competing demands in the body, which is why when a client comes to us and says, I'm bloated and I'm this and I can't make it to 2 p.m. without excess caffeine, but I want to lose 30 pounds, we say you got to pick a lane, because we can't place all of these demands on a very stressed body and then expect it to respond in an appropriate manner, right? It doesn't work that way.
We're adding a stressor. If you want to be in a diet is a stressor on your system. So you are physically interrupting that healing process by choosing a diet when you want to heal.
Right. Now, insulin is a big topic of around this, right? Because people say, I can't lose weight because I have insulin resistance or PCOS or whatever the case is. Yes, it plays a role. Yes, it's inflammatory, but I've seen people lose weight all the time with a fasting insulin of 10, right? I don't want to see that, but I've seen it happen. Could they lose weight more efficiently and more effectively if that wasn't the case? Yeah. Can they still lose weight? Yeah. It doesn't just, again, there's not a brick wall that little cells are building up saying like, nope, no fat loss here because you have insulin resistance. No, it is inflammatory and it can contribute to cravings, energy crashes that make it more difficult for you to go to the gym and be consistent. It can lead to carrying more of that body weight in your midsection. Some of that is also genetic of where you hold that, right? Poor recovery, fatigue, maybe you're more sedentary, all of those things, right? So, yes, the body is not going to respond the same way to that calorie deficit, but it's still going to respond to a calorie deficit. It's just going to, again, downregulate metabolically. And we don't want to be fighting against something unnecessary, which is why, again, we take women through a healing process first and rebuilding metabolism first and getting healthy habits so we know what drove the dysfunction and we don't go right back to that place after. So understanding that I think is important. And once we go through these mechanisms, we'll talk about like lab markers that you actually see when it comes to inflammation. Water retention is another thing. Tissues certainly can hold more fluid for a lot of reasons. Stress is a big one. Dehydration actually causes you to retain more fluid. More like high aldosterone patterns. So, shifting of sex hormones specifically and being more like androgen dominant, testosterone specifically, electrolyte depletion, poor sleep, overtraining and lack of recovery, just general shifts in your cycle, right? All of those things can create an environment of water retention where you feel puffy and swollen and all of those things. That's not body fat and that's not necessarily inflammation. Again, there can be inflammation present in the context of whatever's going on, but water retention and inflammation are two different things. Thyroid and metabolic output. So if you have hypothyroid, I already know that metabolic output is downregulated to some degree. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Thyroid is your metabolic regulator. So the thyroid hormone is very sensitive to the body's environment, but thyroid's another one that we call a downstream problem. If your thyroid is presenting as hypo on labs, we're not going to say medication. I know a lot of doctors do, but why is your thyroid hypo? What got us there? Because anything
similar to insulin resistance, same thing. It's a trickle down. It is not the cause. Right.
So we have to look at that. So again, there are patterns we can see where inflammation certainly can be present. I was Hashimoto's. Autoimmune is always going to be stress, gut, inflammation. So it's there and we know that, but we have to look at why. What got me there? My severe gut dysbiosis got me there. My severe trauma and nervous system dysregulation got me there. My constant fasting and big swings in calorie intake got me there. My shitty food quality, eating out of convenience got me there, right? So those things created this environment of inflammation and stress and gut dysbiosis. And then poof, my thyroid went off. I wasn't wondering why. I wasn't looking at my fucking bloodline saying, well, everyone else has Hashimoto, so that's how I got it. No, my life, my choices and my habits gave me Hashimoto's. And
again, the genetic or epigenetic component, right? Yeah, all of us could have predispositions because of our genetics, but those switches turn on or don't turn on based on our inputs and our lifestyle choices.
So it's not like if everyone in my bloodline has Hashimoto's that it's inevitable for me. It could be much more likely, but I fully own that period of my life and the decisions I made led me down that path. When it comes to your cells, if inflammatory load is high, your mitochondria can literally become less efficient, where you feel sluggish and very reactive, poor recovery, training feels hard, digestion is sluggish, brain fog, right? The same habits that maybe felt manageable or doable at one point in your life might not anymore. That could be lifestyle driven, or that could be a physical change.
And I want to insert again an example of this. My gut dysbiosis is wild right now. The root cause of it is my own stress levels and poor sleep patterns. Okay. So it's creating this stressed out environment. I do everything in my power to keep healthy cell function, right? I'm taking glutathione precursors, and I actually did NAD plus injections for a while at a very low dose because I was like, ooh, this will help my energy, right? I keep seeking how do I fix my cells to help my energy without fixing the behavioral input of I actually need to heal my sleep. And guess what? Now I have this trickle down of jacked up gut symptoms and cognitive symptoms and stuff, all because of my gut, right? But it's because I'm seeking this, what's the solution for cellular health then? And I'm adding that supplement without actually fixing the input. So I want to give a very clear example. Yes, there are supplements. And guess what? I got to the gym. I felt motivated when I was on that. It helped me as a short-term symptom cover up, but it didn't fix the problem.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm no longer taking that because I need to. I'm actively working on fixing the actual cause.
Yep, I love that. And then when it comes to inflammation in liver, we'll dive into this, but the liver is obviously processing toxins, but it's also involved in hormone metabolism, bile production, regulation of blood sugar and thyroid, cholesterol metabolism, handling nutrients, metabolizing alcohol if you consume it, really anything, right? It's getting excess stuff out and processing inflammatory byproducts. And if the liver is bogged down from a lot of things in life, right? It could be just from gut-derived inflammation in the body. It could be just general exposure to toxins in life, all of those things. You can, obviously there's going to be inflammation at play. And then it's kind of this vicious cycle where, okay, the liver was less, efficient at doing its job. So things are recirculating, toxins are recirculating, excess hormones are recirculating. And now we've created this environment of inflammation, which then makes the liver even less effective, right? So, just understanding that correlation can be helpful. Now, lab markers that can point towards inflammation. So CRP is pretty straightforward. That is a more acute phase protein, when it comes to inflammatory signaling, but that is a very clear, straightforward marker of inflammation in the body. And we really want to see that under 1. We don't want to see it at all. So that's a big one. That is also a predictor of heart disease risk as well. So certainly.
So this is not a normal thing that your doctors will order. We will. If our clients have a physical coming up, we'll say, hey, ask your doctor to add these sometimes. Or if we run a panel, obviously we include them. But a lot of times doctors are like, no, I don't need to run that unless you are at risk for a heart issue. Well, time out. We want to look at all these things because together the pattern can show systemic inflammation. It's not only this one number being off.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a direct marker of inflammation in the body. If we're looking at, blood sugar and fasting glucose, right? Fasting glucose being elevated, insulin being elevated. Technically the range for glucose being within normal limits is under 100. I prefer to see like 90 max. I mean, if you're like 85 and under, that's even better. But higher fasting glucose can definitely reflect blood sugar dysregulation, which is definitely an inflammatory process. And then
and again, we're looking at the pattern of glucose, insulin, and A1C, not just glucose, because your glucose might be high one random morning because you had a ice cream before bed last night or something, right?
Yeah. Insulin, we want to see no higher than 5 in a perfect world, which is not the case on a normal blood panel for 1. 2, it is very rarely checked on a general panel. And again, higher insulin resistance is definitely an inflammatory state and metabolic environment. So higher fasting insulin can obviously suggest that that's present.
And your glucose, we've talked about this in our insulin resistance episode, but your glucose could be perfectly healthy, but your insulin might be high because it's working really hard to keep that number down, which is a sign that we're on our track towards insulin resistance, even if your glucose is perfect.
And then something like uric acid is another one that's just a waste product in the body that correlates with oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction, and certainly inflammatory burden. So that's another one, like 3 to 5.5 or 6. We kind of want to see it somewhere in that range. Ferritin is another one. That's an iron storage protein. We talked about this on, I believe, the last episode. Also an acute phase reactant. So when it's elevated, we can obviously assume there's some type of inflammatory response happening in the body. Another one that I really like is homocysteine. So that is an amino acid that is involved in detox related pathways. So if it's elevated, that can reflect a higher inflammatory burden, oxidative stress, poor methylation. And that really is like 6 to 7-ish, maybe a little bit higher that we want to see for that range. And then you might see more like white blood cells are more like obviously can be reflective of acute or chronic immune activity happening. Eosinophils is another one where if we see those elevated, it suggests inflammatory immune activity, histamine issues. And actually, if I see elevated eosinophils on a blood panel, I'm looking at the full context and the symptoms and all those things, but that can also be indicative of, we run a GI map on the front end now anyway with the blood panel. But if I saw that, I would be like, okay, if this person is presenting with gut dysbiosis, which most of the time that's the first line of defense anyway, eosinophils would be a great indicator of maybe we should look a little bit more specifically at the gut.
Ferritin, which we talked about last week, is another one.
Yeah, no, I did that one.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, no, that's okay. So that's iron status and inflammatory activity. And then some other ones, this isn't one that's actually on our typical panel, but is another good one is GGT. That can reflect liver stress, oxidative stress, and inflammatory burden. So that's just an enzyme associated with detox activity. And then fibrinogen is a clotting protein made by the liver, and that rises with inflammatory stress and can also be another useful marker for inflammation and the systemic inflammatory burden on the body. It's hard to like spit out all of these numbers and ranges on a podcast, but we do have a list of functional labs that we order and the ranges that we like to see. So you can always message us for those if you want that full list. But those are the markers that can point towards inflammation. But again, you're not really going to go into your doctor and say, I'm inflamed. Jess and Jill said, can you run CRP and homocysteine and GGT and all of these things? Because one, you're asking a question of conventional medicine that can't be answered. And two, we still have to know why you're inflamed. So when we give these to you, we want you to understand what we're looking for. But it's very, very important that we look at the whole person, everything that they have going on, their history, their symptoms, and correlate it with this, and then correlate it with everything else and say, we're seeing signs of inflammation. Now we have to figure out why. So like that's only step one is to get these. So hopefully that was helpful.
And I think we're going to end up breaking this episode into 2 parts where we are going to do, because we're going to go down the whole liver pathway also. So to recap, also I'm having one of my like neurotic OCD moments. Earlier I said NR, I take NR as a precursor to glutathione. I'm getting all my supplements mixed up. I take NAC as a precursor to glutathione, NR as a precursor to NAD. Anyway, to recap, get the basics down first, improve your body composition in terms of adding muscle, not just thinking you need to lose weight, but add muscle and reduce body fat. Add nutrients, improve your stress response and your sleep. Then, okay, now if some of these inflammatory symptoms are still persistent, now let's go ahead and we'll talk about how to address it in our next episode.
Also, I just want to add this one little thing that you just said, that we talked about insulin resistance being an inflammatory thing that's happening in the body. So often people are like, well, I can't work out because I'm inflamed, or I can't do this. If you are insulin resistant, the most effective thing to do is lift weights and add more muscle. So while that does create a short-term inflammatory response in the body, it is a good stressor on the body. There are cases, and we'll talk about this more in the next episode, where we do pull training very temporarily for clients in certain cases. But if you're insulin resistant and that is the one thing that's top of mind for you and you feel inflamed, please go lift weights if you're not already. Adding muscle is one of the best things that you can do for your health long term. So that is part 1 of 2 of inflammation, detox, fat loss, resistance in this lab series. So we will see you next time for the other half of this topic.